Hi everyone, on this week's Questions for Kerry, I want to talk about the appraisal and, what if the house doesn't appraise? Now what? Does the seller actually have to sell for the appraised price? Absolutely not. If the buyer and seller agree to a certain sales price and if the house doesn't appraise, really there are a few different options that a buyer and seller might have to work through. So let's talk about that. Obviously, if you get a cash buyer, then most cash buyers probably won't do an appraisal. Every now and then we'll get a cash buyer that still wants to make it subject to the appraisal. So for the most part, if you end up with a buyer that has to get financing, if the house doesn't appraise and the buyer will most likely be in a situation where, either they won't have the funds to bring the difference between the appraised value and the sales price to closing. And if that's the case, then their loan could get denied. You might have a buyer that does have some ability to bring some cash to close. So we might be in a situation in that case where we go back to the seller, all terms are back on the table to say, okay, seller, here's where the home appraised. It was subject to the appraisal and it didn't appraise. So, what is the seller's willingness to maybe renegotiate terms a little bit more, adjust some of the concessions or other items that may have been offered, so that the buyer and seller can both come to some meetings of the mind. We might just be in a situation where the seller really has to have and is planning on receiving the amount that they had sold for with the sales price. And if the buyer can't bring that difference to the table, we might just have to terminate the transaction. So in that case, what could happen is the seller might have to come back on the market and find a new buyer. Sometimes in that second transaction, the seller may not get the same sales price. It takes a little longer, of course. We have to go back through inspections, but in the end, sometimes we just have to do that. We could also be in a situation where if, as an agent, I feel that the appraisal was negligent, perhaps we try to fight the appraisal. I will say, though, that appraisals really are an opinion of an appraiser. I have seen 3 different appraisers give different values for a home that could be very different. So sometimes we have luck fighting an appraisal, but most likely we won't be able to fight the appraisal. And so the seller could potentially say, we're not willing to sell for the reduced price. The buyer might still really want the house. So perhaps the buyer either tries to see if the lender will allow a new appraisal. And many lenders won't unless we can really prove that that appraisal was negligent somehow. Or there is still the option that the buyer could just get a brand new lender, order another appraisal. They're going to have to go through the process of the loan application and underwriting. And so it does drag it out a little bit longer, but that is one other option. So different advantages and disadvantages. Give our team a call and we can talk you through and help you navigate what that process looks like if the house doesn't appraise.